welcome back my dear friends. A very good morning, good afternoon and good evening to all of you. And this is the TQM2 lecture series under NPTEL MOOC, and we have already completed 3 weeks of lectures, and this is the 16th lecture, which is the first one in the 4th week. And by the time when you are seeing this lecture, you would have taken 3 assignments, and I am sure they have been very useful to you considering the concept we have covered. And we will slowly go into more depth, obviously no theoretical concepts, but more of a conceptual concept, how you can utilize these factor models, and later part also different concepts for design of experiments and the TQM2. And as you know, I am Raghunandan Sengupta from the IME department, IIT Kanpur. So with this we will start the 16th lecture. So if you remember that we were trying to find out the efficiencies in the just last few minutes of the class, or the 15th one, where we considered 2 diagrams. One set of diagrams was basically the combination for the for the linear model, how y would change with respect to x1 and x2, and considering you had a plane in the 2 dimension. And if you look from the top with y being fixed, you can find out the combinations of x1 and x2. And later on we considered that if you find out the combinations of the factors with respect to the efficiency for the single and the combined model, the efficiency would increase. And if we saw for 2 factors the efficiency of 1.5, and it increased linearly accordingly. So this is only true for the linear model. Obviously for nonlinear models or more than 3 factors, obviously the ideas would be much different. So continuing our discussion for 2-factor factorial design models. The simplest type of factorial design involves only 2 factors or set of treatments. Treatment, again the word is being used for the levels of differences of the effects which you have. So consider those effects, again going back to the example of the etching problem. So those were basically the levels of wattages of the power. So there are levels of factors which was A and other factor was B, and they are arranged in factorial design. That is, each replicate of the experiment contains all the combinations of the treatments. In general, there are n such replicates, so depending on the numbers. Consider an engineer is designing a battery for use in a device that will be subjected to some extreme variations in the temperature. So there are 3 choices of plate material from which we have to select one. So the temperatures can be controlled in the product development for the purpose of the test, and as I mentioned, there are 3 levels. The engineer decides to test all the 3 plate materials at 3 temperatures, which are 15, 70 and 125. So in the other example, the etching problem, we had 4 different etching: 160, 180, 200, 220. Here the temperatures are 15, 70, 70 and 125 centigrades. Because these temperature levels which you are just mentioned are consistent with the product end use environment, because there are 2 factors at the 3 levels, hence the design now becomes a problem of a combination of 3 to the power 2, because there are 3 factors and the combinations you are going to take results in 3 square, which is 9. The 4 batteries are tested at each combinations of the plate material. So now there are 4 batteries. If you remember in the other example for the etching bond, for each such etchings or treatment, there were 5 different examples or sample size. So the table 5.1 shows the life in hours data from the battery experiment. So the temperatures are given in the topmost row, which is 15, 70 and 125 degrees centigrade or Fahrenheit. And the material types are basically given as 1, 2, 3. So the combinations at temperature 15 for type 1 is 130, 155. For 2, and then the next value is 74, 180. So if you read the values in the first column corresponding to the 15 degrees of temperatures, those values are one I have already read. The second values would be 74. If you see the first column, so I will just try to highlight it in order to make it a little bit more relevant. So these are the values. So this was 130, then 174, 170. I am not highlighting it, I am just pointing it out. 150, 159, 138, 168. Similarly, for temperatures for 70, those values would be, I am using a different color. So it will be 155, 180, so on and so forth. then the next value is 188 till the last value is 160. For temperature of 125, I will just read the last column in order to make you understand how the overall matrix is. You will basically have, let me use a different color. So that would be 70, 58, the next value being again 70, 45, 104 and 60. In this problem, the engineer wants to answer the following questions. So there can be more than 2 questions, 3, 4 and more and so on and so forth. But the two important questions are as follows. What effects do material type and temperature have on the life of the battery? And is there a choice of material that would give uniformly long life regardless of the temperature? So you want to basically check whether the temperature is immaterial or not. This last question is particularly important because temperature fluctuations would be there. So if temperature fluctuation is not affecting the life, obviously the battery can be used in different environments. It may be possible to, as I am reading it, it may be possible to find a material alternative that is not greatly affected by the temperature. If this is so, the engineer can make the battery robust to temperature variance in the field and be rest assured that it can be utilized either in the Arctic, it can be used in the tropical climate, it can be used in the desert and so on and so forth. So I am given an example to make it much more practically oriented. So this is an example of using statistical experiment design for robust product design, and it is very important engineering problem which needs to be solved. In engineering design, in a chemical distillation plant, or you want to design it for as in this case for a battery, or you want to design for a bridge, whatever, the factors may be different, but the concept remains the same. So this design is a specific example of the general case of two-factor models. To pass to the general case, so let us consider these variables as defined. So you will basically have y, which is the effect we want to find out. Now it will have basically 3 suffixes, suffix I, suffix j and suffix k, where I would basically be response when factor A is in the ith level. So these are the factor levels and I changes from 1 to small a. Then there would be a factor B in the jth level, they would basically change from j is equal to 1 to small b for the replications which are being done. So for each A and B combinations there would be replications, so those replications are given by the suffix k changing from 1 to n. So say for example for the replication the kth one or k1th one, k1 is a particular value of k, you will basically have a combination of A and B coming out for which are the 2 factors. So in general, a two-factor factorial experiment will appear as shown in table 5.2 in the book, in order in which the combinations would basically be, there would be small a numbers of A, capital A factors, small b numbers of capital B factors, and each basically would have replications will be given by the value of small n. So total combinations or observations are A into B into n, and they are selected at random, so that this design is completely randomized design of experiments which we are trying to do. So the observed is basically a factorial experiment can be designed by the following model. So what is the model? You will have y suffix I j k combinations of all the both the factors and the levels at which they are, which will be given by the mean of the mean of the mean. I am using the mean for the 3 times in the sense that I am trying to find out the averages of the averages of the averages for both the factors and for all the combinations of the effects which you have, plus tau I would basically be, now I you remember basically changes from 1 to small a, that means you are trying to find out the combinations corresponding to the factor A. They would be beta j would basically will consider the values of the fx considering I is fixed and j is combined, this changing. So if I consider I along the row and j along the column, so in the I case what it means that I am keeping j fixed, what is the factor B fixed, I am trying to basically find out the so called average for any fixed value of capital B. And when I am combining j only, considering j only, it means that I am keeping capital A factor fixed and trying to find out the average of the fx along the columns. Then you will basically have the fx which is coming by the combinations of tau and beta, which is, so it will be tau beta suffix I and j, all the combinations, and obviously there would be an error corresponding to the case when you are considering factor A, factor B and the different levels of combinations. Combination means those effects which you are doing for the experiment. So, again I am repeating, I is equal to 1 to small a, j is equal to 1 to small b and k is equal to 1 to small n. Where now I will explain what I have said, that I will again repeat it, where mu value is the overall mean effect for which I use the averages of the averages of the averages. So, technically it may not be the right word, but it is just to make you understand that I am taking the averages for all the two factors, along with the fact that there are different levels of combinations which are n in number. So, tau suffix I is the effect of the ith level of the factor value A, which I just mentioned. Beta suffix j, so tau suffix I was there, beta suffix j is the effect of the jth level of the column factor. Again, as I mentioned, row for and the columns for the b's. A, B are the capital A and B. So, beta j is the effect of the jth level of the column factor, while tau into beta suffix ij is the effect of the interaction between tau I and beta j. So, the combinations I am taking for both the factors combined, and epsilon suffix I j k is the random error component corresponding to each combinations of I, j and k. Both factors are assumed to be fixed and the treatment effects are defined as deviations from the overall mean. So, what we will consider that when you are considering the effects of A's only keeping B's fixed and combining the effect of B's only keeping A's fixed, then we have some assumptions. And what are these assumptions? They are the sum of the errors corresponding to the fact that B's are fixed, B's means capital B's are fixed, hence the sum of all the tau i's is 0. Similarly, if you go look at the other picture, keeping A fixed and trying to basically find out the combinations of the so called effects along the columns, it will be beta suffix j, the average value is 0. Similarly, interaction, in order to make our life simple, we will consider the error terms in such a way such that the combinations of tau and beta of suffix I and j, sum them up for both the values of I and j comes out to be 0, which means that if I keep tau fixed and find out the averages for all the betas for j's, or keep betas fixed and find out all the averages for the values of tau i's, they come out to be 0. This is the assumption. Because there are n replicas of the experiment, there are total number of small a into small b into small n number of total observations. So, if I find out the mean, so when I find out the mean, on the left hand side you had basically y suffix I j k. When I try to find out the averages, then on the right hand side we know the averages of the taus was 0, average of the betas was 0 and average of the tau betas considering I is fixed, j is changing, or j is fixed, I is changing, it is 0. Hence, what you have is basically the total effect, considering that we have been able to assume these three important assumptions of the average values being 0, would be mu is equal to mu ij, that means the averages for any I and j corresponding to the fact that we are doing the experiment time and again would be on the right hand side mu without any suffix, which is the average of the averages of the average. Again I am using in a very layman sense, but I am sure you will get it, plus tau I plus beta j plus the effects of tau beta suffix ij, because we are intrinsically assuming another assumption, the error term has an average of value 0. So, in the two-factor factorial model, both rows and column factors, that is corresponding to the treatment A and B, are of equal interest. So, if there are equal interest, we consider the first test as testing the value of the row effects to be 0. In the sense, we will consider the null hypothesis as tau 1 is equal to tau 2 till the last value, which is tau a, is the fx is 0, and the null hypothesis corresponding to the alternative hypothesis. I am sorry for that. The alternative hypothesis that any two of them would not be 0. So, at least one of those taus i's would not be 0. When I am taking the column effect, I will basically have the null hypothesis as beta 1 is equal to beta 2 is equal to dot dot till the last value, which is beta suffix b, because there are total number of combinations small b for the effect of factor capital B is 0, and the alternative hypothesis is that for the column effect would be that at least one of them, that is beta j's, is not equal to 0. And if I am trying to basically test the interrelationship effect between the combinations of rows and columns, it will be tau beta suffix ij is equal to 0 for all combinations of ij with respect to the alternative hypothesis that one of them is not equal to 0 or at least one. Now, the statistical analysis of the fixed model. So, let yi, now this is what I will repeat time and again, please make it very clear to all of you. So, yi suffix dot dot, so which means that I am trying to basically find out the effects of the average of the b's and average of the n's. Basically yi dot dot basically means the total of all the averages under the ith level of factor. Now, if I have y dot j dot, it means the total average effects for all the combinations of i's and all the combinations of k for any fixed value of j, which is for the factor b. And if I write it as y, and which is one I mentioned, y dot j dot dot gives the total combinations of all the observations under the jth level of factors. And if I give the suffixes as y suffix ij dot, it basically means denotes the total of all the averages in the ith and the jth cell, considering the effects of all the so called the experiments which I am doing, considering the different combinations of A and B at the level of I and at the level of j. So, and finally y dot dot dot, 3 dots basically means the combinations of all the averages, which I did mention as average of the average of the average. So, this basically means the grand total of all the observations. So, we will define now correspondingly as, now listen to me carefully, they would be very simple to understand, but the nomenclature may not be confusing to you, that is why I am making it clear. It would be y bar, that is the averages, and what are the suffix? Suffix would be I dot dot, that is the first case. Second one would be y bar again, average, it is dot j dot. The third case is y bar, and what is the suffixes is dot dot k, and the last one would be dot dot, I will not use the word dot dot k, my apologies, it will be basically y bar ij dot, which means you are taking the averages of any one combination of A and any one combination in B, finding out for all the effects, and the final one is y bar dot dot dot, which is the average of the average of the average. So, as the model comes and how the calculations are done, I will explain it very briefly. It is very simple to understand, just you have to add up and find out the averages accordingly. So, what are those? The first one which I just mentioned. So, I will use different highlighters in colors to make you understand. So, let me use the red one first. So, y I dot dot basically means you are taking the averages for j and k. So, this is j being averaged from 1 to b, k being averaged from 1 to small n, and if you find the averages, what would be the denominator? Denominator would be basically be the sum total of all the numbers which you have when you are taking the second dot and the third dot. So, that will be b into n as mentioned here. So, I is changing from 1 to small a. So, this is clear. Then I go to the second combination of color in order to make you understand. Let me use the yellow color. So, now it is y dot j dot, that means you are trying to find out the averages for all the i's and all the n's. So, this is what is given, I is changing from 1 to a, k is changing from 1 to n. So, if I am using the words I, j, k, basically means that I is changing from 1 to small a, j is changing from 1 to small b, and k is changing from 1 to small n. So, here the averages are taken for the combinations of all the i's and all the n's or all the k's, sorry. So, the average would be divided by a into n. If I am taking the average as y ij dot, that means I am taking the average only once, because there is only one dot. So, that will make things clear to you. So, I am trying to find the average corresponding to k is equal to 1 to n. Hence, it will be divided by n, because that is the total number of the observations which I am taking, and if I combine them for all the 3 combinations I, j, k, I basically find out the combinations of the averages for all these 3. So, which is what is given. Sorry, I used in the third case, let me just change it in order to make you understand. I will again go back to the third formula. So, this is what should be the case. So, this is what is there, yij for k is equal to 1 to n, so hence it is divided by n. And the last one, let me use the color blue. So, if it is dot dot dot, basically I try to find out the averages for all the 3 a, b and n. So, this is a, b, n, and I am using the last values for I is equal to changing from 1 to a, j is changing from 1 to b, and k is changing from 1 to n. So, obviously, if there are 3 summations, the average would be found out for the sum of all the combinations, which is a into b into n. Now, I need to find out the total sum of the errors. So, I divide them into, technically there would be 3 such combinations, one for a, one for b and one for the samples observations. So, the total corrected sum of the squares would be found out by, first the formula you will make you understand. It will be, I use the pen on the highlighter and use the color black in order to make you understand. So, this is the average which I am finding out, which is yij for any cell. So, consider ijk is basically a 3-dimensional matrix. Any cell would basically have a location or address given by ijk minus the average of all of them combined together. So, that is why it is y bar dot dot dot. I want to find out the square of that, sum them up and find out the total sum of the squares for all the 3 combinations being a, b and the number of observations we have taken. So, y squared, because I am trying to basically minimize the sum of the squares. So, if you do the calculations accordingly and if you have the formula, they would be divided into 3 sets of errors. So, this I will highlight without going to the detailed combinations of the calculation. It is very easy, but still I will skip that. And now you use the highlighter, let me use the color yellow. So, this is easily discernible. The first would basically be the color combination here. Next would be the color combination of the so called orange, and the third would be the color combination in which I am using the green one. So, now I will again switch to the color black. So, it will be now this part, the first part which is yellow, if you see, it basically be the combinations of the errors corresponding on 2 parts. Number 1, I am keeping I as fixed and summing it up for all j's and on k's. So, this is the first part, and finding out the difference from the average of the average of the average, which I mentioned. Second part would be I am keeping j fixed, that is a column fixed, and summing it for all the i's and all the n's and finding out the difference and the squares correspondingly with the average of the average of the average, which is here. The second, so this takes care of the yellow highlighted one. For the so called orange highlighted one, there would be one combination. So, what is the combination? It will be average of all the n's keeping I and j at the fixed level with respect to the so called average of the average, but when you are taking the average of the average, they would be technically be 2 averages. One is when you are keeping y fixed and I fixed, and another case you are keeping j fixed. So, I fixed here, j fixed here. So, this gives you the second errors, and the third error would be the corresponding error which you are trying to find out for each cell with respect to the average of the average of the average, which is here, which I already found out, but it would basically be the average of the average corresponding to the fact that I am keeping I and j fixed and trying to find out for all the n's. So, because the 6 cross products on the right hand side are 0, so notice that the total sum of the squares has been partitioned into sum of the squares due to rows, sum of the squares due to columns. So, sum of the rays due to the rows is here, the first part, for the columns is this part. So, this is for the row, this is for the column. Column means I am trying to find out for all the B's, and capital B, and rows is for all the A's. So, the rows would basically be given by the suffix ss suffix a, sum of the squares suffix a. For the columns would be ss suffix b. A sum of the squares, third part is a sum of the squares due to interaction between them, which is ss s, sum of the squares of the combinations suffix a and b. And the final one would basically be the error part which is coming, which is ss suffix e. So, e I am using all general to find out the error terms. This is the fundamental ANOVA equation for the two-factor factorial model. For the last component on the right hand side of the equation 5.4, which we have just discussed, we see that there must be at least 2 replications, that is n is equal to 2, to obtain an error sum of the squares in order to solve the problem. So, we can write the total equation as this. Sum of the total squares would be for the rows, for the columns, for the combinations, and for the error part. So, now I have divided into 2 parts. Now, pause here. If I do it, I am not going to go into the details, but try to explain it more qualitatively. If there were 3 factors, what it would be? It would be coming out for A, which is the first factor, B, which is the second factor, C is the third factor. Then I will basically partition into combinations like this: errors due to combination of A and B, errors due to combination of A and C, errors due to combination of B and C, and error due to combinations of A, B, C, and finally there would be error for the errors also, sum of the square of the errors also. So, again the degrees of freedom for A would be the total combinations of a column of the rows, that is -1 is a small a minus 1. The degrees of freedom for the column would be small b minus 1. Degrees of combinations for A and B combined would be a minus 1 into b minus 1, and the total sum of the errors would basically be, error term would be, total number of combination is what, A into B into n minus A and B, because you have A number of factors in the row and B minus factors in the column. Now, if we go to basically the combination of 3, the degrees of freedom would be, listen to me carefully, it will become clear, it will be A minus 1, B minus 1, C minus 1. Interactions taken of 2 at a time would be A minus 1 into B minus 1, A minus 1 into C minus 1, and B minus 1 into C minus 1, and the total combination of 3 taken at a time would be A minus 1 into B minus 1 into C minus 1. And finally, when you go to the last part, the total combinations would be, errors would be basically A, B, C, and in the bracket it would basically be combinations as given. So, the main effects, so the main effects would be, because the 6 cross products, okay, So, the main effects of A and B have A and B levels respectively, therefore, they have A minus 1 and B minus 1 and the degrees of freedom. The interaction degrees of freedom are simply the numbers of the degrees of freedom for the cells, which would be A minus A into B minus 1, and the total combination of the errors or degrees of freedom for this example would be A, B, in the bracket you have n minus 1, and as I said, for the 3 factors and 4 factors it can be done accordingly. So, with this I will end the 16th lecture, and thank you for your attention and have a nice day, and I will continue considering the concept for the 2 factors and explain it more details with a small problem. Have a nice day. Thank you.